Hello and welcome back to the ShefF1 podcast, where today we are previewing and predicting a race weekend which is hopefully a little bit more interesting than the one we had last time out in Japan. We've of course got the Bahrain Grand Prix coming up this weekend. I'm joined by Seb and Amy as per usual, and before we get into any of our predictions, let's just try and do our best to talk about what happened at Suzuka a few days ago. It might have been the most boring F1 race of all time. A lot of people blaming McLaren for that and their sort of rather conservative strategy, and we'll start off with McLaren as the port of call for conversation, because it was a little bit timid from them. It wasn't very ambitious, it wasn't very adventurous. It's almost like they let Verstappen win the race almost. Seb, in this fight for the driver's title, in both Norris and Piastri's case, do they need a bit more aggression from the team with their race strategy, or are they doing, exactly what they need to do, take home the constructors title and just, let the drivers do their thing?
Yeah, I think it was strange from McLaren. I think that even from a constructor's point of view, at the end of the day, they were guaranteed a 2-3, even if they had, let Piastri go off and chase after Max. And, best case scenario, it could have been a 1-2 or maybe, 1-3 or something, which would have been more points from a constructor's point of view, as well as in terms of the drivers' championship. I think they are just obsessed at the moment with trying not to upset either of the drivers, because they've got such a strong pairing and they want to keep that pairing for the foreseeable future. So yeah, it's a bit confusing. I think obviously that battle for number one driver is also, no one's really too sure, because it seems like Norris is the number one, but Piastri's, when it comes to the races, seems a little bit quicker, but he doesn't really ever seem to start ahead of Norris because of Norris's qualifying pace. So it's just a strange dynamic, and I think it's one that I'm not too confident they're going to navigate in the correct way.
Yeah, I mean, it's a case of, by the looks of things, McLaren are putting all their eggs into the Constructors' Championship basket. But that does mean that if they are to sort of guarantee themselves the top step of the Constructors' Championship, it does mean they have a bigger budget going into what is a bit of an unknown season for 2026. But Amy, I mean, it is pretty clear that the drivers are, and the fans are more bothered about the Drivers' Championship. What is your thoughts on the McLaren situation? Should they have been a little bit more adventurous last weekend?
I personally don't think Oscar was faster. I mean, the McLaren pit wall, Andrea Stella have come out after the race and said Oscar wasn't faster. Naomi Scott and Jacques Villeneuve, they both said it. And I think if Oscar was faster, then overtake Lando. Do it then. Show it. He's saying, I want to get past. I think Oscar's got it in him more than Lando to actually, not listen to the team, orders more. So for me, I think, that was the best result they could have got. I think even if Oscar went past Lando, no one was getting past Max. And there also was that thing that, it could rain in 3 laps time. Let's not jeopardise that. I'm shocked McLaren didn't win, more so than anything. I'm shocked neither of the drivers could get past Max for that full race. But yeah, I don't even know what to say, but that is my point, is I just think it's going to be interesting the rest of the season. I think no one's exactly taking the edge out of the pair, and I think it could be anyone's, and I think it is going to be that driver that does ignore team orders who can go on and win the Drivers' Championship. But right now, if McLaren had to label either driver 1 and 2, they have to go with Lando just because of that experience last year. But I don't think that's going to set in until later on in the season, when there's probably a more clearer 1 and 2 driver.
I mean, if we just, quickly sort of look back, I suppose a short view back to the past almost. If you take when teams have the quickest car, the approach that McLaren is making is definitely sort of an inverted one to, if you look at Red Bull last season, they just did their best to make sure that Max was the quickest on track, which helped them out initially in the Constructors, and of course did Max huge favours in the Drivers' Championship before everyone else started to catch up to them a little bit. But then before that, when Mercedes were the outright quickest, they were just going for 1-2s each and every single race, striving for perfection and not what could be just considered an okay race weekend at the start of this season. I really do think that McLaren have the fastest car by quite some stretch. Okay, maybe Bahrain will throw up a little bit of a curveball with Ferrari bringing some upgrades, but I think they're definitely quicker than the Ferraris. They're quicker than the Mercedes, who do look pretty strong, but I think it's because the drivers are just getting the very best out of that car. And then, of course, they're much quicker than the Red Bull, but not necessarily in the hands of Max Verstappen. And I feel as though at the start of this season, if McLaren have this advantage with performance, teams are going to catch up soon because, 2026, again, it's such an unknown. Some teams might really go for it by the end of this season to try and secure some better funding. But I think while McLaren are in a position where they are the quickest team on the grid, they really need to go for it and build up a more sizable advantage in both championships to ensure that they have a little bit more confidence when their back is pressed against the wall, when other teams do eventually catch up to them, which I'm sure they will. But if they don't, then they are playing this pretty well, taking home the easy 2-3 rather than sort of properly going for it. But for me, it's not particularly ambitious. It's not the sign of a great championship winning team. But I suppose we have to wait and see, how the rest of the season unfolds. Of course, a lot of conversation surrounding, like you both said, it's difficult to try and tell who is that first and second driver. But we are only nearly 4 races in now, so it's still very early days for McLaren. But if we go to Suzuka now, I mean, Seb, Amy, if you could both just describe it in one word, I'm sure you'll say the same thing. Just, the floor is yours.
Boring.
Yeah, very boring.
Very. But I think it was because there's just such a massive delta that was needed. I think because of the dirty air and obviously Suzuka already being quite a hard track to overtake on. It just didn't, with the cars how they are and with everything, how these regulations have shifted into what they are now. It just, nothing was lining up for it to be a good race, and it was an absolute bore fest. I can only think of 1 or 2 overtakes, and even they were from a driver making a mistake, or Hamilton on Hadjar, which is like, that shouldn't be an overtake I remember, but I do because it was the only one, and I got up at 6 o'clock in the morning for it. So anyway, it was boring, but look, I think it's one of those where it's going to happen at some point in the season. The rest of the season's been so, I think, really entertaining. So I think, it's just bringing us down to earth a little bit, maybe.
Yeah, it felt very 2023-esque with like Max Verstappen leading. So like it just looked like no one could get past him. And then I guess the McLaren's just behind. Yeah, at the top of, for the podium, no one was fighting for any position. So I think that's why it was so boring. And we were just praying for maybe some rain, something to spice it up a little. But it just went the whole way down for every position. No one was fighting for really anything. And everyone was just trying to get to the end. That's what it felt like to me anyways.
Yeah, I mean, it's a case of we have had this issue of, particularly in this hybrid era, of drivers struggling to overtake, especially on old school circuits like Suzuka. I mean, if you look at it, it really is a bit of a sort of roller coaster in that it's single file, it's such a narrow circuit, and there are nowhere near as many opportunities to overtake as there were before, simply because the aerodynamics are so good now. And so all corners that were, medium speed with some braking zones in there, it's a case of half of it's flat out now. Or, even still, the cars are massive. And so it's a case of like, the track is like, one car's width and a half wide. And so, of course, it's going to be impossible to overtake. Meanwhile, you have tracks like Saudi Arabia recently brought in, same with Las Vegas, that often provide a lot of decent entertainment with these bigger cars. Because even though they're both street circuits, even though there are walls keeping the rim, there are parts of the track that are really, really wide and then, make up for really decent overtaking opportunities. I mean, as for Suzuka specifically, Seb, how do you think the FIA or Formula One, whoever it is, how do you think they could go about improving the racing there in the future? Because it would be a little bit sort of heinous to take it off the calendar, given how well liked it is and well respected it is amongst drivers and fans alike. But, what are the steps to make the racing more interesting there?
I think obviously if you look at the circuit itself, I think you have to have at least one hard braking zone, at least a corner where you can't just, as you said, like a medium speed or something like that, where I think you have to have one where you actually do, it's a hard braking corner, as I said. But then I think, apart from that, I think it is just down to the cars, really. I think that because it's so hard to follow cars, and that was the thing about these regulations when they brought them in, is that it was designed, these regulations, to allow cars to follow without losing as much downforce from the dirty air. But I mean, it's got to a point where it feels exactly the same as before the 2022 regs. So it just feels as though it is the cars. And again, they're massive. Obviously, that's somewhat being helped by the 2026 regulations. Obviously, they are a little bit smaller, but nowhere near enough. I'm not entirely sure what they'll do, apart from just eventually, I think it's also a thing of the field being so tight, which is obviously what we all want to see. We want to see the field so close, and in qualifying, it's made it super exciting. But it does mean in the race, cars don't really have a big enough delta to get past the other cars unless there's that tyre difference. And Suzuka, I think with the tyre choice as well, I think that sort of ruined it a little bit, because the one stop was so easy and there wasn't really much tyre degradation coming into it, that there wasn't those tyre offsets either. So I think it was just a couple of mistakes here and there, and I think a couple of adjustments, and I think Suzuka could still be, everyone loves it, all the drivers love it, and I think hopefully a couple of changes, I think the fans can go back to loving it as well.
Well, of course, another circuit, another older circuit recently that has had some changes made to its race weekend structure to make the racing more entertaining is, of course, Monaco, with the mandatory 2 pit stop rule they're implicating there now. Amy, do you think the same should be implemented for Suzuka? Would that, okay, maybe, overtaking will still be just as difficult, but if there is an element of, genuine strategy and decision-making put in there, that could, shake up the finishing order by the end of the race on the Sunday. I mean, would you be in favour of sticking in the mandatory 2-stop rule for Suzuka as well?
But then it just gets so picky on what tracks do you choose. We'll be going into each race weekend where we'll be like, oh, is this a 2-stop one? I think Monaco is its own, separate thing. It's the Monaco Grand Prix. It's the biggest event of the whole calendar, in my personal opinion, and probably a lot of others. So I see why they're doing it. But then if we pick and choose, you've got Spa, Silverstone, tracks that when it rains, it pours, and it does make it so exciting. Like Suzuka, if that had rain on that track, it would have been brilliant. Monaco, when we look at Monaco and we looked at Formula E, they had 100 overtakes in one race. There is room to overtake. It's just the cars and the engines and the regulations. So I think that's more maybe the issue that we need to look at, the actual cars changing rather than changing the regulations of the race, in my opinion.
Yeah, I mean, particularly in recent years of this hybrid era, the cars have just become enormous, like we've said. And of course, the team bosses now have just rejected the idea of bringing in V10s for next season, which does make sense because it's, of course, at very short notice, a lot of money and a lot of time would have been spent looking into how to develop the current engines for 2026. But there is a possibility that by 2029, V10 engines could be put into the chassis of every F1 car, and then that could leave some room to make the cars a little bit smaller as well. So fingers crossed that could be the solution, because that, I think, suits all parties if V10s were to be brought back. I do miss that sound dearly, but we'll leave Suzuka there now in terms of the track itself. We should talk about Yuki Tsunoda, though, and his time there. Not exactly the dream debut he was after. Amy, we'll start with you. Do you reckon for Bahrain things could get a little bit better for him, or is it still a bit too early to call?
Yeah, obviously. I think you need to give him time. I mean, we said it was short-lived for Liam and he didn't have that much time, but he did have practice. He did have other races to, fit into that car. And this is only Yuki's second race without any practice in it whatsoever prior to Japan. So for me, yeah, time. And if Liam probably was in the car, he'd probably do better than Yuki this weekend because he did testing there, so you would think so. But I think just the more he has practice, FP1s, quali, I think he probably would have done better in quali last week, but he made a mistake. So I've got hopes for Yuki Tsunoda, but I don't think he's just gonna get in this car that is clearly so hard to drive, that is built for world champion Max Verstappen, who's just I don't think he's human at this point. That it'd be unfair to. I think he has to get in the points, though, in my opinion, for him to prove that it was the best option to replace Liam. But I don't think it's too bad that where he finished in Japan. The only issue is it was his home race. But for me, Isaac Hadjar was the best Red Bull driver, even though Max Verstappen won. For me, I keep falling in love with all these rookies. I love it so much, the fact that we have so many rookies on the grid and they're just doing amazing for the majority. It's been so long because we've had so many, one rookie a season in recent years, probably since Lando Norris, Alex Albon and George Russell, that this is a massive influx of rookies on the grid. And a lot of them are proving, their worth. And for me, Isaac Hadjar stood out. I don't know about you, but imagine he ends up replacing Yuki at Red Bull.
I mean, it's looking pretty unlikely that Yuki will be leaving that seat now. Unfortunately, we do love to see a bit more drama, especially with that Red Bull seat. But Helmut Marko has said that Yuki Tsunoda will keep that seat for the rest of the season, which is very good, to be honest, because I think if they were to make another change to the teammate of Max Verstappen. It would just be a terrible look for them, really. I mean, such a fall from grace so quickly after a couple of Constructors' Championships, 4 Drivers' Championships on the bounce, and now they can't even find a teammate for Max Verstappen. Seb, how do you see Tsunoda's weekend going?
I think that obviously we've had the luxury of being able to watch the first 2 practice sessions. Doesn't seem like he's really gotten at home with the car so far. Obviously, it is quite early to say into the weekend. But I thought there was quite a lot of positive signs from his first weekend in Japan. Obviously, it's hard to really say, he did great in practice. So, that's a positive sign. But I think it was a positive sign. I think especially when you compare to how Liam, he was struggling massively even in the practice session. So for Yuki to come in and look pretty quick, and obviously in Q1, I think he was less than a tenth off the pace of Max. So I think all the Red Bull engineers, I think there was some sort of noise coming out of Red Bull that they were happy with how he did. It was just that one mistake in Q2 that cost him, and then obviously in the race, it was basically impossible to make inroads. So yeah, I think he did okay. It's just now whether that confidence and that sort of, it just plays in his mind that he finished P12 or wherever he finished. I think it was P12 anyway. But if that just plays on his mind, and then the fact he was out in Q2, and whether it just starts to build and build and build like it did with the drivers we saw before, like Gasly, Albon, Perez, and obviously Lawson as well. It felt like once they got in a run of bad results, it just kept coming and coming and coming. So it's just whether Tsunoda, I think he needs to get some points this weekend, as you said, Amy. I think he needs to try to hit the ground running, have a good qualifying. I think once he gets that first session, that first bit of confidence under his belt, I think he'll be fine. I think there's just a lot of pressure on him to get that session under his belt.
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, I wouldn't expect too much from him this weekend in Bahrain, simply because, as proven by Liam Lawson, 2 races is not enough to get to grips with this Red Bull car, so it seems. But fingers crossed for him that it does turn around quickly, because we are sort of missing that other Red Bull driver in that sort of really competitive fight at the top of the grid. And then, it'd be great to see Tsunoda maybe battle with Max once he is comfortable with that car, if he gets comfortable with that car, to put himself in such a position. But let's move on to the sort of rest of the talking points going into the Bahrain Grand Prix weekend. We've got Ferrari bringing upgrades, as said earlier, really big ones as well, to help out with aerodynamics, mostly to the floor and their rear wing as well. Hamilton looking pretty quick early on. Amy, of the two of Leclerc and Hamilton, who do you think will be, on top by the end of the Grand Prix?
This is definitely something I want to bring into my predictions. I know Lewis, like we've seen in practice, he's looking fast, but for me, I think Charles is so used to that team, so used to that car, that surely he has the upper edge. And also, I've seen Lewis in one of his interviews. He was asked, when are we going to see that magic by you, from you? And he said, don't wait. And for me, when he was at Mercedes last year, I just felt like when he would make comments like that were quite self-deprecating, he actually didn't have, it's not like he took that and used it almost to prove as a point on track. He almost just kind of put his head down, and it's not been the best. Obviously, he won that sprint race, but I don't think other than that, it's been the greatest start for the whole team, not just Lewis Hamilton. So I think Charles Leclerc's used to the disappointment of Ferrari, and does keep his head up at all times going into a new race weekend. He's used to it. So for me, I think Charles just edges it, in my opinion.
Yeah, a couple of teething troubles in that first practice session for Hamilton, but then ended up putting in a pretty decent lap to put himself P3, P8 in FP2 as well. But of course, if you are sort of fairly new to F1, the practice results really sort of mean nothing once we get to the second half of Saturday. Seb, I mean, Ferrari, how far away are they from McLaren and I suppose Max Verstappen as well? And how important will these upgrades be in order to try and get them in this Constructors' Championship fight?
I mean, they're obviously super important, the upgrades, but it's just whether or not, again, I think Ferrari, for me, have fell into a little bit of the same trap that Mercedes have done for the past couple of years, where I just don't trust them anymore, that these upgrades are actually going to have any impact. Obviously, last year, they were all over the place. They brought upgrades that basically ruined the middle part of their season. And then finally, when they figured them out, then they became competitive in the latter half. But it's just, I just don't trust them. And I have no idea whether these upgrades are going to have any, positive impact. I still think they're going to be off the pace of the top runners. I think that McLaren, Red Bull, even Mercedes, in the hands of George Russell, I do think will be closer to the front running, McLarens and Verstappen. So yeah, I'm just not that confident going into this weekend for Ferrari. I think it will, and even if they, these upgrades do work, I think it will obviously still take time for them to get to grips with them properly. So yeah, I'm not too expectant of Ferrari this weekend. I think they'll be maybe half a second, off the pace of the front runners when it comes to qualifying, I think.
I mean, there was a lot of excitement, especially from Lewis Hamilton going into this weekend about being looking forward to drive this sort of new Ferrari, as it were, because they have made a significant overhaul to their floor. But I mean, if we're talking about aerodynamics here, Bahrain isn't necessarily a circuit where aerodynamics are the utmost important. Japan, however, maybe they're a little bit, a week late on these upgrades. However, if you are making adjustments to the floor and the rear wing, it should improve drag as well. Amy, I mean, if we're talking about Red Bull as well, bringing in cooling upgrades for this weekend, how do you think Max Verstappen will get on in comparison to the McLarens? Are McLaren still the team to beat this weekend?
I think absolutely. I don't know if that's a bias that I have, but yeah, I think McLaren are so far ahead, and if it weren't for Max Verstappen being Max Verstappen, I don't think that Red Bull would be anywhere near. I think it's definitely going to help these upgrades. Obviously, it's going to be roasting hot. People are going to be burnt like me. But I can't see the Red Bull being as close to McLaren, but due to Max Verstappen being in it, I think surely it's going to be another fight between them three. I do think, I said this last weekend, even when Max out-qualified them, that I believe they could get past them in the race quite easily. Obviously, that didn't happen. So it'll be quite telling of if Red Bull can still manage to take something from this, but I still think it's the McLarens to beat 100%.
I mean, the team we haven't really gone into too much detail about at the top end of the field is Mercedes, Seb. Cooling has been an issue of theirs for quite some time now. I'm talking the last few years, and it's set to be a bit of a scorcher in the Sakir Desert this weekend. A little bit cooler on Sunday, though. But how do you think that will affect Mercedes' performance this weekend? Will they have a little bit of a setback, especially after such a promising start to the season?
Yeah, it definitely was the case last year. I think we saw that when it was the cooler races, obviously Vegas is the one that springs to mind, they were a lot quicker, those sort of middle European races. They were a lot more competitive when the track temperatures were lower. I think that it obviously does help them that it is a night race or an evening race, shall we say. And I think that under the lights, I think the temperatures don't seem too bad. It was obviously really, really hot in FP1 today, but I think that come the race, I don't think it's going to prove to be too much of an issue. I think that they'll have it under control, and obviously qualifying is in exactly the same conditions. So I think they'll be okay from that point of view. I think once again, though, I think it's just McLaren are just too far ahead, and I think the brilliance of Max Verstappen, I think, will still put him up there once again. It was noted before, obviously, that we came into this weekend that this was out of definitely the first few tracks of the season, the one that least suited McLaren going into it. But I mean, if we look at the practice sessions, it doesn't look like it's affecting them at all. We obviously don't know about engine settings or whatever, but I still think that McLaren are the ones to beat. But I do think that Max, I still think he's going to be the closest to them. And I wouldn't personally be surprised if he does manage to put it on pole. And once he's on pole, I think he's obviously a very difficult man to overtake. But as for Mercedes, I think that Russell, Antonelli, I think that obviously, if we're speaking about Antonelli, it is probably one of his best weekends as well to get as close to Russell as possible. He's had so much experience around Bahrain. Obviously, he's not that experienced around any circuits, but Bahrain is one of those where he's obviously had the full preseason testing. He raced an F2 here last year. So I think that out of any of the circuits for Antonelli to be as close to Russell as possible, I think this is his best chance. But for Mercedes, I still think they're going to be third, fourth quickest team.
Okay, for the rest of this video now, we're going to delve into our predictions, a big thing that we do here on ShefF1. And before we go and talk about how we think Bahrain is going to fare, let's talk about how we got on with our Japanese Grand Prix predictions. And it was a Grand Prix weekend to forget, and I think our predictions follow a similar suit. Except for Amy, though. Amy, you're now on 11 points total, which is more than double Seb and mine's, more than Seb and me combined, which is absolutely ridiculous. 4 points for you coming home this weekend. You got your start of quali correct with Charles Leclerc in comparison to Hamilton and Russell. And then just talk us through the rest of your predictions as well. I mean, you said Tsunoda to be the flop of quali, and you just, I presume you sort of saying that it's going to go a sort of similar way for him this weekend as well.
I hope not. I mean, it could be, but like, I feel like anything could happen with that second Red Bull seat. I mean, you know, I have trust in his ability as a driver, Yuki Tsunoda, so I could see it potentially going better. But I don't think it was a terrible qualifying. I weren't disappointed the fact that he finished obviously lower than both RBs, including Lawson, and I feel like that was kind of a point to prove if he finished ahead. But Liam Lawson genuinely had a terrible qualifying. Yuki Tsunoda made a mistake. Like, I feel like. no offense, Leah, but yeah. So I'm glad I went with Yuki Tsunoda because I was going to go with Lawson, but for me, I think just the pressure of it being his home race as well as his first race in a Red Bull, I went with him. Podiums, none of our podiums were correct there, were they? I mean, we kind of all said Norris to win, Piastri second, and then me and Rudy had Russell in third, but Seb had Verstappen. Seb, you had them all there, just in the wrong place. But then, of course, driver of the day, I had George Russell, which I don't think's, you know, he's had he didn't have to do anything. It was that sort of race where, like, you can sit in, lock in. Him and Charles Leclerc have very similar, you know, just get to the end. And, of course, better than Tsunoda and Alonso's. Alonso's having a bit of a shaky start.
That's Japan out the way. Let's predict Bahrain, starting off with pole position. Amy, let's start with you.
I'm going with Oscar Piastri. I mean, have I got the advantage that I've just finished? FP2's just finished. Yes, I have, and he is top of the table. But that is not the only reason I'm going for it. I think Bahrain's a track where obviously normally they have testing and then they jump. Well, sometimes it's in Barcelona, but last year was in testing and then it jumped straight into the race. But I think Oscar Piastri is one of them drivers who is so knowledgeable. Like, he reads information, and he just takes it in and proves it on track and puts it into a statement, I guess. So I think that's what he's going to do here with qualifying. He's had so many times, so many practice around this track that, you know, he's a sure thing. He knows what he's doing. And I think I'm just going with Oscar Piastri here. I think the car's going to carry as well massively here.
Seb, how about you?
I do agree that it's going to be a McLaren on pole, but I'm going to go for Lando Norris. I still think that, as I said, McLaren, I think they're just going to be too far ahead of the rest of the field, so I think it is going to be a Piastri Norris for pole. And if I'm just basing it on who usually has the edge on qualifying, it's usually Lando over Oscar, so I think Lando once again will get that pole over Oscar.
Interesting. I mean, I've gone for something a little bit different. I have sort of bought into this Ferrari hype, as it were, albeit not very much of it. But I'm saying Charles Leclerc to finish on pole position. I think he's got a stronger chance than Hamilton. Okay, maybe he doesn't even have as stronger a chance as the McLarens, but if he just puts together that one good lap in Q3 in a Ferrari that could be pretty competitive this weekend, then I feel like it could be possible to see Leclerc on pole. I mean, Bahrain for Leclerc has historically been a really, really strong track for him, nearly winning there in his first or second race for Ferrari. Of course, that historic F2 feature race or was it a sprint race? Well, one of the F2 races where he pit in a really unorthodox way and still went on to go and win. And then even when Ferrari have shown less pace in recent years, he's pulled out some pretty decent results, and of course the 1-2 in 2022 as well. Hang on, was that the 1-2 or?
Yeah, 22.
Yeah, so the 1-2 there as well, which of course he spearheaded with Carlos Sainz just behind. So I just think Bahrain has and Leclerc has a pretty decent track record there. And if that Ferrari car is as quick as Lewis Hamilton makes it out to be, then sure, Charlie Leclerc on pole. And I'm going to put all my eggs into the basket of Charles Leclerc and have him down as my star of qualifying as well. Basically just reiterating the same reasons. But just because I think Leclerc will get pole, it doesn't necessarily mean he will be the star of qualifying. We look across the entire field for this prediction. My throat's going, so Seb, over to you.
So I actually had originally predicted Isaac Hadjar, and I don't think anyone would begrudge me for that. I think he looks excellent, and I still think he will be one of the stars. But you know what? I'm going to change it. I'm going to back Jack Doohan to be my star of qualifying.
Wow.
He's going against my advice.
Yes. Do you know what I am? Because I think Jack Doohan's looked pretty good so far this weekend. He looked, I think, P7 obviously in FP1 and then quicker than Gasly as well in FP2. He's got a lot of experience around here. I think he took a pole maybe in F2, I think, a couple of years ago.
Sounds about right, yeah.
Correctly. He's obviously had the full testing, pre-season testing as well. So similar to Antonelli, he's got a lot of experience around the circuit. And I still believe in Jack. I still think he's had not the best start to the season, but still I think he's got that raw pace. I think maybe when it comes to the races, yes, he's a little bit inexperienced. He does seem to drop back a little bit. When it comes to qualifying and that pace, I think he's got it in the bag. I think he was unlucky last week. He said he was in quite a bit of pain because of obviously his massive crash in FP1, I think it was, last week. So, yeah, I'm backing Jack Doohan. He's going to be my star of qualifying. And I reckon he could. Do you know what? I think he's going to sneak into Q3.
Oh my goodness me! That's a shock prediction before we've even got round to him. That's certainly an interesting one. I mean, I'd like to see that happen. Doohan's one lap pace has looked pretty reasonable, but I don't know. I feel like that does seem a little bit far-fetched. I mean, he's had more track time than a lot of drivers in the midfield, of course, with plenty of rookies coming in for that first session. But Amy, I presume you're not going with Jack Doohan either.
No, I'm going to go with Alex Albon, who has been a bit of a shock in some ways this season. Obviously, we've always knew he was a talented driver, but I feel like he's never been able to get out the car. But now I feel like everyone's, analysing it more so the teammate. And now he's got Carlos Sainz, who's obviously a very competitive driver and brilliant in his own way. But I think that's pushing Alex. And Alex has actually been the better of the two, which if someone said that to me at the start of the season, I wouldn't believe that because I do think Sainz has that edge. But no, Alex, he feels at one with the team, home, he knows that car more than Carlos. So I guess he's got that advantage on him. But yeah, I think, getting in the points constantly, another Q3, maybe potentially high up in Bahrain, I think Alex Albon could be up there.
I mean, I like that prediction. Although, if we do look at these couple of first practice sessions, in particular, practice one, it has been a bit of a tough time for Albon in Sakir so far, complaining about the brakes, not really being given enough time in separate stints to really get to grips with the car this weekend, clearly having some teething troubles there. But I do outright refuse to believe that this will be a bad weekend for him when it matters, because he is in wonderful form, proving so many people wrong. And long may it continue as well, because it's been so entertaining to see. Let's move on to our flops of qualifying now. Seb, we'll start with you.
Well, I feel like I should probably actually say Jack Doohan for this as well, just to cover my back. But I'm not going to, because that would just be basically cheating. But I'm going to go for Yuki Tsunoda, and it sort of pains me to say this, but I just think that Yuki, I really want him to do well. But as I said before, I think that there's so much pressure on his back now because he didn't have a great start to his Red Bull life. I think there's going to be a lot of pressure on him. And I think that he could stumble once again. And it might not even be his own fault. We know how difficult that Red Bull car is to drive. But yeah, I'm going to go for Yuki. And I hope he proves me wrong. But yeah, I can just see him getting knocked out in Q2 or Q1 once again this week.
Yeah, unfortunately, Seb, I think you're right there. It probably might be another tricky weekend for Tsunoda coming up, as much as I don't want it to be. But like I said before, Liam Lawson proved that 2 races and 2 race weekends is not enough time to get to grips with that Red Bull, with the way it's handling at the moment. Amy, who are you saying is your flop of qualifying?
Yeah, so I'm going to go with Hamilton. I spoke about it before. Even though Ferrari are bringing the upgrades, I just don't see it working. I mean, we spoke about how they used to bring them last season and they kind of didn't kick in for another few races. So, yeah, and I just feel like he feels a bit unmotivated. I spoke about that interview and someone asked him, when are we going to see it? And he was like, don't wait. And I was just a bit like, maybe that means, like, don't wait because it's going to be here, but I took it in more of a way as don't wait for anything special, which is quite sad coming from a 7-time world champion. So yeah, I've just gone flop of quality, and I hope I'm proven wrong, to be honest.
I've gone with someone else who has also recently moved team. I'm saying Carlos Sainz to be the flop of qualifying. It's not been the start to the season that everyone expected for Sainz, and despite looking promising in pre-season testing around Bahrain, I just feel as though it's going to be a little bit more difficult for him this weekend to kick on. I feel like with the form Albon's in at the moment, I mean, Sainz is on, 1 point in comparison to Albon's 18, which really is quite telling as to how difficult life has been for Sainz in that Williams at the moment. Maybe not necessarily entirely his fault, but certainly a little bit off the ball is the Spaniard. And I just don't think it'll look up for him this weekend. I think he'll be a flop of qualifying once again. Maybe not necessarily Q1 exit, But I think Alex could make it into Q3 and Science won't really follow suit. So maybe not necessarily the worst qualifying performance from Science, but just nothing to write home about, which at this point you'd think maybe, we need to sort of have some bigger expectations for Science, despite the fact he, of course, is in a new team. Let's move on to our predictions for Sunday then and go through our podiums. Amy, we'll start with you.
Yeah, I've gone with Oscar Piastri and then Lando Norris in number 2. I think with McLaren, for me, and I do think this is probably the first way they can go about it, is whoever finishes, top in qualifying gets the priority in the race. Obviously, if Lando can pass him with, just ignoring team orders and I guess going for it himself if they're allowed to fight, then I think he could get past Oscar. But I've got Oscar, qualifying first on pole. And then obviously I think Lando's just as strong and he'll come in second, but then there's no way I can ignore Max Verstappen, and that's why he's finishing off my podium. He could even be higher up, but I'm just going with the logic that I think the McLarens are much faster and Max won't be able to get past them.
Seb, how about you?
I've actually gone for Max Verstappen to win. I think that just the pace that he showed last couple of weekends, actually, I think his race paces, I think we mentioned before on the podcast, out in China, I think that was really impressive as well. And then obviously last week was super impressive. I think he's on the bull. I think he's starting to get to grips with that Red Bull. And I think that when in the race, I think that's when it really counts. And obviously Max, his racecraft is arguably the best on the grid. So I think that Max P1, Piastri P2 and Norris P3. I still think Piastri is just going to once again have that slightly quicker race pace than Norris. I know Amy said that maybe he didn't have that last week. I still think he did. But I'm going to go Piastri P2 and Norris P3.
I'm going to go with something fairly similar to you, Seb. I'm going to say Max Verstappen is winning the race as well, which now that Seb and I have both predicted that, it won't happen, folks. So basically just ignore everything I'm about to say now. I'm going to say Norris to finish second and Leclerc in P3. I do really want to put Piastri on my podium, but I just feel as though it would be quite tough for Leclerc to start on pole and not finish on the podium, as naive as that sounds, especially considering how quick the McLarens are on the Sunday. But I just think I want a bit more mixture on that podium, to be honest, and I do think Max has got more than he needs to go and win that race on Sunday. I think as for Norris, it could be a case of Max has a 10-second gap, or it's a case of they're fighting right till the very end. And of course, Bahrain is a circuit which is much easier to overtake around. But I feel as though, maybe in that first stint, it could be a case of Leclerc leads the pack a little bit, but then eventually drops down as Verstappen and Norris both properly sink their teeth into the race. But it's a tough one to call.
You know what I can't believe, is that Max Verstappen and Lando Norris only have a point difference in the championship between each other. That's insane to me, because I feel like Max has finished so much lower than Lando. Obviously, Lando's got the win, and he's got a podium every race. Yeah, so for Verstappen to be a point behind, it just shows how it can sneak up on you. And it'll be interesting for this race, I think, where both of them finish, because I feel like now looking at it, it's going to be a free race, a three-man battle for the championship, Verstappen, Norris, and you can't ignore Oscar here. And I think the fight's just starting early, and it'll be like last season. And it'd be interesting to see where they both finish up this weekend.
Yeah, absolutely. With Max Verstappen, he is just inevitable to be at that top part of the, whether it's the championship or at the end of a race. It's a case of he really is at this point driving like a true champion. Okay, sure, his defensive driving might still need a little bit more moral work. However, everything else, the guy doesn't make costly mistakes. His pace is constantly rapid, whether that's in qualifying or in the race. And more often than not, he can pull off a decent strategy as well. So I've got full faith in Verstappen to win this weekend. But that's not to say that it won't be a close one. Let's move on to driver of the day. Seb, who are you saying?
Well, I've gone for him predicting to win the race. I'm going to predict him to be driver of the day. I've gone for Max Verstappen. I think that if he is... I'm not predicting him to be on pole, so I do think that he will have to come through the McLarens, and obviously we know how quick the McLarens are, so for him to get past those McLarens and then stay ahead of them, he's going to have to pull off some brilliance, and I think he will do. And I think if he does manage to win a race where, look, Bahrain, you can make overtakes. I think if he is able to win a race, unlike Suzuka, where I think he was able to stay ahead, not only because he was quick, but also because of the track allowed him to quite comfortably stay ahead. I think that if he's able to really hammer home how good of a driver he is around Bahrain and hold off those McLarens, I think that he has to be driver today. So I've gone for Max Verstappen.
Yeah, well, I mean, it is a case of Bahrain will provide some more opportunities to overtake, but that does also mean it provides a better opportunity for Max Verstappen to get his elbows out as well. So I feel like once he gets up into that first position, it will be very, very hard to take that away from him, especially considering that he goes to any means necessary to make sure he gets the job done. So yeah, Max Verstappen, I think, he will be tough to beat if he does get out in front, especially early on into the race. Amy, who are you saying to be your driver of the day?
Well, I actually really liked what Seb said about Antonelli. I actually originally had Hadjar there just because I've been loving what he's been doing, but I think naturally in a Mercedes, even though it could struggle this weekend, will finish above an RB, you would think. So Antonelli, yeah, I just think it's probably the closest he could get to Russell in the last few races due to his experience around Bahrain. So for me, yeah, I think driver of the day would mean Kimi would be getting above George here. I think I actually went with similar the other week. Yeah, like Kimi getting driver of the day would mean that he would be above George, and I actually genuinely think that could be the case. But one thing I did want to say about George, I think he's an underdog this season, and I genuinely think, behind the scenes going quiet, you've got a lot of teammates fighting in regards to Ferrari and McLaren, that he could actually be a big surprise. It's Mr. Consistent once again, and yeah, I think he could be an underdog for the championship, which is a bold prediction, but I actually back him a bit this year.
I think this year is sort of reassuring everyone. I mean, okay, sure, no one's called him Mr. Saturday for quite a long time.
Yeah.
But he has definitely sort of graduated from Mr. Saturday to Mr. Sunday by this point, if we are taking his race results from this season alone. He's been world class. Basically, he's been unbelievably consistent, composed, gets on really well with Antonelli, like you said, proving to be a really, really worthy role model to help him settle into the team. And it looks as though Mercedes have made the right call, giving him a long-term contract, taking them long into the future. I've gone with Esteban Ocon to be my driver of the day. I feel like it won't be necessarily an unbelievable performance from him, but I feel like, a top 10 finish, maybe like a P7, P8, something like that, maybe a little bit quicker than Bahrain across the course of the weekend as well. Haas are bringing cooling upgrades, so that's maybe where Antonelli will struggle, especially with such a hardcore driving style where he's just quick all the time. I feel like that management of the car, with the temperatures, may be a little bit difficult for him, especially considering his lack of experience. But I'm just going to say Esteban Ocon because he's been pretty solid at the start of this season as well. That Haas car doesn't look too terrible. And then, yeah, if they are bringing in temporary cooling upgrades for Bahrain, if it is as hot as it could be on Sunday, that means that Haas have a pretty decent package to give Ocon, maybe even Behrman some points as well. But now on to a more somber note. Let's go from our driver of the day to our flop of the day. Amy, we'll start with you.
Well, originally I was going to go with Hadjar as my driver of the day. So I think Liam Lawson's just not on his level. I think, again, just from the look of FP1 and FP2 as well, which is unfair. We're not going to take it literally. But yeah, Isaac Hadjar's impressing once again. And I don't think I can see Liam coming near him, which is crazy because Liam has had race experience. He was literally a Red Bull driver and he's getting beaten by his rookie teammate. So for me, I think that's a bit of a flop to, it clearly looks fast, this RB. And to not get in the points with it when your rookie teammate is, I think that's a flop. So for me, yeah, Liam Lawson.
Yeah, I mean, it's safe to say, and I'm sure this term has been thrown around by a few people already, but Lawson has gone very quickly from being the hunter to the hunted, especially after being kicked out of Red Bull so quickly, despite the fact that he was tipped to be the guy, coming in at late notice, for RB in recent times. And now, obviously, he's back there, as someone that has a lot less confidence than he once did very recently. Seb, who's your flop of the day?
I'm going for Alex Albon, and obviously I think that would be a bit of a surprise for him to be a flop, obviously, after such a strong start to the season. But I feel like I always do this with my logic for predictions. It's basically just, he's been so good so far, he can't be that good for the whole season. So surely at some point he's going to have some sort of weekend where he's not quite on the pace. And Williams don't look 100% on it. Obviously Albon was, P4 and FP1, but other than that, I don't think it truly suits them this circuit. I just can't see them really being that that top midfield side. I think with obviously RB looking so quick, and I do think that Alpine will look a little bit stronger compared to how they've looked in recent weeks. So I think that Williams won't be able to have the stand-up performances they've had earlier in the season. I think that Albon maybe for the first time will get beaten by Sainz this weekend, so he's going to be my flop.
I've gone with Fernando Alonso for my flop of the day, simply because it has been a pretty terrible start to the season for him. Retirements in the first couple of races. I mean, China wasn't necessarily his fault. And then Japan failing to score points despite not being in a terrible position to do so. Just didn't really have enough pace all weekend. Meanwhile, if we exclude Japan, Lance Stroll has been putting in a couple of decent performances at the start of this season. And I just don't think it'll get any better anytime soon for Fernando, which really is quite painful for me to say, considering how much I do love Fernando Alonso. But yeah, that Aston Martin isn't getting any quicker. He's probably not getting any quicker if we do sort of take a step back and realise that he is, in his 40s now. And despite the fact that he has been defying age for so long, it's only a matter of time before he starts to slow down as well. But I really don't want to doubt him. However, I feel like this weekend won't exactly be a turning point for him or Aston Martin for that matter. Now, enough about the drivers. Let's go on to who we all think the best team will be. Amy, we'll start with you again.
Yeah, so we kind of said we weren't going to go for McLaren, but we've kind of agreed that if they get a 1-2, then obviously they are the best team. So I have gone with McLaren because that follows my podium. I do genuinely think they are the fastest car on track. One thing that you might know about me is I love Lando Norris, but he's really doing my little head in at the minute because he's saying too much in the media that, it's not the car. It's not just the car, don't get me wrong, but the car is a massive help to them at the minute, and that's fine. Like, you can admit that Max had that help for so many years of having the best car, and I'm sure that was a massive factor in him winning so many, championships, but also his ability. And I don't think anyone's putting down Oscar or Lando when they say McLaren's got the best car, because they just do, quite clearly. But yeah, it was quite interesting actually. Lando Norris said he'd love Max Verstappen to have a test drive of the McLaren. He can come on down, and I would love to see that, to be fair. I think we should get all the drivers in different cars for one race and see how they all do.
Yeah, a contractual nightmare, but certainly one that would be very entertaining. So let's just reiterate the point about McLaren. If you do select them to be the best team of the weekend, or of the race rather, they have to finish in a 1-2 position to earn the point. So Seb, have you gone with McLaren as well, banking on that 1-2 or no?
I haven't. Obviously, I've predicted Verstappen to win, so I don't. Even though I can definitely see McLaren getting that 1-2. I haven't gone for them for best team. I do quite like to go for some sort of random predictions. But I think for this one, I think it's quite a reasonable one. I've gone for RB as my best team. I think obviously the pace they've shown throughout the start of the season, arguably there were some rumours that they were actually quicker than Red Bull. I don't think that's true, but definitely a lot easier to drive and a lot easier to get the maximum out of. Isaac Hadjar, he was originally my driver of the day. Originally my star of qualifying, sorry. But I still think, I think he's going to have a great weekend once again. He looks on it in the practice sessions. And then Liam Lawson, I think that he'll be better. I still don't think he's going to be quite on it and quite on the level of Isaac. But I still think that he's going to get more comfortable with the car. I think he knows Bahrain pretty well as well. So I think that if any weekend, out of the first few weekends of the season, I think this is probably one of his better chances as well, like most of the drivers on the grid. But I think that he'll do well around the circuit this weekend. I think that he could even maybe sneak into Q3. I think maybe a double Q3 for RB. And I think they're going to get a nice, healthy haul of points.
Yeah, I mean, that RB does look to be a pretty decent all-rounder of a midfield car, and Bahrain is possibly the most neutral track, as it were, hence why, testing is done there so frequently. Definitely plays into RB's strengths. I've gone with Haas, just following my Esteban Ocon Driver of the Day prediction. I just feel like it could be a result for Ocon anywhere between P9 and P7, and then Behrman can sneak once again into the points like he did in Japan. I do see that happening, and I hope it does as well, because I've developed quite the soft spot for Haas in the last couple of years. But let's move on now to our final prediction category, and that, of course, is our shock predictions. Now, if you're new around here, usually for every correct answer we get in every other prediction, we earn 1 point. But for for our shot predictions, which is basically just a wild card one that could be anything that happens over the course of any time in the weekend. You can earn more points based on how shocking that prediction is. So Seb, we'll start with you.
So I spoke highly of Antonelli before, and I'm actually going to predict him as my shot prediction to get on the podium for his first podium F1. Hasn't really been that close to it so far, although he did obviously, I think he finished P4 in Australia, so ignore what I just said there. But I think that potentially maybe we could see a couple of DNFs. We haven't really seen that many safety cars the last couple of weekends. I don't think we've seen any. So I think that Antonelli, maybe we'll see a couple more and he'll be able to capitalise on that. As I mentioned before, and as Amy mentioned as well, he has got a lot of experience compared to the other circuits of the season. So I don't think it's likely, because I think that the top three will be that Verstappen, Piastri, Norris. But if there are any slip-ups, I think that Antonelli could be in a decent position to capitalise. So yeah, Kimi Antonelli on the podium would be my shot prediction.
Yeah, I think we'd all love to see that. It's been a hot minute since we've seen the Italian flag hoisted above one of the drivers on the podium. But Amy, what about you? What is your shot prediction?
Well, I'm also hoping for an Italian flag on the podium. I've gone with Charles Leclerc, well, the Italian national anthem, Charles Leclerc to win the Grand Prix. For me, I think that's a bit of a shock. I think due to Ferrari's form, they've been nowhere near the podium, well, other than the sprint win. So, yeah, for me, Charles Leclerc, I think you've got to consider the fact that they are bringing upgrades. These upgrades could perform miracles. I doubt it, but that's why it's going to be a shock. And no one can deny Charles Leclerc's raw speed around a track. He could go and put it on pole and be able to carry that race win out. And yeah, he's won there before, so it's not absolutely ridiculous, but I think it would be a shock. So therefore, yeah, Charles Leclerc to win.
Yeah, again, for anyone new watching, we do tend to sort of leave our shot predictions a little bit separate to the rest of the ones that we've made, hence why Seb thinks Antonelli could get a podium and Amy thinks Leclerc could finish on the top step of said podium. I've gone with one that isn't necessarily too shocking, especially based on the conversations we've been having earlier in this episode. I'm saying that Hadjar will outscore Tsunoda once again. I think Hadjar could finish in the points. I don't think Tsunoda will, hence, obviously, how he outscores him. But I think he's already looking like the quicker driver of the two of them this weekend, and Hadjar slowly but surely building up to be a pretty decent driver for RB. Some great results, in qualifying, and then of course a great result in Japan last week as well. And I just think that confidence must be sky high for him now, especially after a weekend to forget in Australia. I just feel like, yeah, the sky could be the limit in Bahrain for Isaac Hadjar, especially in the context up against Yuki Tsunoda. So that rounds out our predictions for the Bahrain Grand Prix. If you've enjoyed what you've seen, then do make sure to stick around by subscribing to the channel, and we've got more content coming your way, as always, once the weekend has concluded. Thank you to Seb and Amy for joining me once again for this. Thank you to all of you for watching and sticking around till the end, and yeah, we'll see you in the next one. Goodbye.
Bye.
Bye.